Hello and welcome. Nope, not yet.
It says live.
This is live. Hello and welcome to Keeping It Real, a webinar series by the Institute for Responsible Nutrition. I'm Lucy Gable, exercise physiologist, nutritionist, and coach, and I'll be your host. Tonight, I'm interviewing Dr. Robert Lustig, pediatric neuroendocrinologist at the University of California, San Francisco, author of best-selling book, Fat Chance, Beating the Odds Against Sugar, Processed Food, Obesity, and Disease, and founder of the Institute. Good to be with you, Dr. Lustig.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So, Dr. Lustig, a lot of people have read your book. They've heard you speak. And a lot of people have watched your viral video on YouTube.
Yeah, way more than I ever would have imagined.
It's almost 6 million now, I think.
It's getting close. Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
I don't understand it.
It's impressive. But still, a lot of people have some very basic questions about your message.
I understand, and I still have some questions about it. That's why we do research, trying to answer those questions. And so I'm happy to try to fill in the blanks.
Good. And of course, you can't get by without some misconceptions as well. So what I'd like to do today is answer those questions, bring some more clarity, and hopefully shed even more light on what you really want people to know. Does that sound good?
I'm happy to help.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do today is, this is a live webinar, so I'm going to start with questions that people have already asked when they signed up for the webinar. And you, in the audience, can go ahead and just type in the chat there any questions or comments that you might have for us. And one of our wonderful moderators will bring it over to us and we'll include it in the conversation. And that is if we haven't already talked about it. Until then, I'm going to start with a couple questions that are basically the fundamentals about Dr. Lustig's work so that everybody can get some perspective. Okay, so Dr. Lustig, you're a pediatric neuroendocrinologist.
That's a mouthful.
It was.
I couldn't even put it on the door. It's so long.
So can you explain just a little bit about what that is and what you do?
So endocrinology is the study of glands and hormones, and neuroendocrinology is how the brain controls hormones and how hormones control the brain. Now, there are a lot of things that are neuroendocrine. For instance, why boys are boys and girls are girls, as an example, how sex hormones affect the brain. But obesity is a neuroendocrine disorder. And when we discovered the hormone leptin in 1994, that codified it as a neuroendocrine disorder. And I just happened to be well situated and well placed at that point, and was starting to see obese patients, and the obesity epidemic was starting to flourish. And I was taking care of kids with brain tumors. And these kids did not have the ability to be able to see their leptin signal. So they had leptin in their blood, but the brain couldn't see it because the neurons in the brain were dead. And so I was charged with taking care of all of these kids who were massively obese because their brain couldn't get the leptin signal. Their brains thought they were starving. And I had to take care of them. And the question was, well, what do you do? Because it turned out they weren't eating all that much more than standard, but they burned no energy. And the question was, why? It turned out that these kids were releasing a tremendous amount of the hormone insulin. And insulin is the energy storage hormone. Because their brains thought they were starving, their bodies thought they needed to store everything that came in because they thought they were starving. So in essence, this was a neuroendocrine disorder based on the brain damage. And what we showed many, many years ago now was that when we used a drug to block insulin release and get the insulin levels down, not only did these patients start losing weight, and they lost considerable amounts of weight, they started exercising spontaneously out of the blue. It wasn't something we anticipated, but they started feeling better. So we did this in some people without brain tumors, and the same thing happened. When we got the insulin down, their energy expenditure improved. And what this proved to us was that the biochemistry was driving the behavior. The biochemistry comes first. Now, that's completely opposite of what we've all been told all these years, is that the behaviors come first. Everybody thinks, well, you eat too much, you exercise too little, therefore it's behavior, therefore it's your fault. And what this showed was, no, the biochemistry comes first, and when we altered the biochemistry, we got the behavior to change.
So their bodies were releasing too much insulin.
Right. And everybody's releasing too much insulin. We're all making about 2 to 4 times as much insulin today as we did about 40 years ago. And the question is, why is that? And what do we do about it? It turns out there's something upstream of the insulin, and that is the environment.
The environment.
What has changed over the last 40 years? And the answer is our food. Our food has changed. Our food environment has driven the biochemistry, has changed our insulin resistance and our insulin secretion, so that now we are all hyperinsulinemic, which drives chronic metabolic disease such as diabetes and heart disease and many other diseases as well. And unfortunately, that increased insulin makes us want more, eat more, exercise less. And so when people see obese people eating more and exercising less, they're assuming they're in control of it.
Okay.
They're not.
So I'd like to get more into that in a minute. But before we go deeper, I just want to talk about what you've said about medical school and how you had studied nutrition in the past, actually, nutritional biochemistry.
In college, I didn't know about leptin. Nobody knew about leptin. But I actually studied nutritional biochemistry. That was my major in college. And then I went to medical school, and they promptly beat it out of me because a calorie was a calorie, and it was all about calories in, calories out, calorie balance. And, you know, to be honest with you, for the next 30 years, that's what I practiced as well, because I didn't know any different. And it was only when we started doing the research on these kids that it became very apparent that we got the equation wrong. We had association, but not causation. And it turned out the causation was in the other direction. And it took the research to figure that out. And since then, there have been many other pieces of data that have fit nicely into this puzzle, that the biochemistry drives the behavior. So that's why I wrote the book. That's why IRN was founded. That's why we are continuing to try to push on not just doctors and dietitians, but on politicians and the general public to basically revamp, rethink the paradigm. There are many, many theories that have overtaken various aspects of science, and these theories are wrong, and these theories must die in order to move forward. Well, this is a theory that must die. We're gonna kill it.
Okay.
And we're going to replace it with the right information.
Okay. So before we go on, I just want to back up about leptin. So you had mentioned insulin overproduction, and you talked about leptin, but could you just explain to everyone what leptin is?
So leptin is a hormone. It's a polypeptide. It's 17,000 amino acid.
That's too much.
Molecular weight.
A hormone is good.
Peptide that is made by your fat cells, and it circulates in your bloodstream, and it goes to your brain, and it goes to 2 areas in your brain in particular: the hypothalamus, which is in control of energy balance and hunger, and it basically tells your hypothalamus you have enough energy on board to not eat so much. So it's a feedback mechanism. It's like a servo feedback mechanism, like the thermostat on your in your house. And it also tells you can burn energy because you have enough energy on board to do so, because you're not starving. So you can engage in normal levels of exercise. You can engage in puberty, which is very energy intensive. You can engage in pregnancy, which is even more energy intensive, because your brain can see the signal that you are energy sufficient. It also goes to a second part of your brain, which is called the nucleus accumbens, and that's the reward center of the brain. And what it does is it extinguishes reward. So when you eat that piece of chocolate cake and you love it so much, but eventually you say, I've had enough chocolate cake. in part, that's due to leptin. And when leptin is working, you can extinguish that signal. But when it's not working, when there's a problem with that signal, then the chocolate cake continues to be a little too enticing. And so it actually helps you, fosters continued overeating, but not because of hunger, but rather because of the reward. So leptin extinguishes reward, both of which are necessary for good energy balance and weight maintenance.
So if people are overproducing insulin, does that also mean they're underproducing leptin?
So what insulin does is it drives energy into fat cells, so it makes you gain weight. But it turns out, and this is the research that we've done, is that insulin blocks that leptin. That's the thing that causes leptin not to be working in the rest of us. If you have a brain tumor, the leptin's not working because those neurons are dead. In the case of the rest of us, it's because the insulin is blocking the leptin signaling. And if you understood exactly how insulin worked and how leptin worked in the neuron itself, you could see why insulin is a leptin antagonist. And it actually makes sense that that should be, because after all, there are only 2 times in your life that you actually want to gain weight. They're puberty and pregnancy. If your leptin worked right all the time, you could never gain the weight. Because as soon as you started to gain the weight, your leptin would kick in and you would then reduce your food intake. And you'd be like the 97-pound weakling on the beach, never being able to bulk up. So there are 2 times when you actually have to gain the weight. And they are times when your insulin is way high. And that's on purpose so that you could gain the weight. And then when you cut the cord and then insulin levels fall again, you can lose the weight. So it makes sense that insulin should block leptin. The problem is now we're all hyperinsulinemic, so now we're all not seeing our leptin, and that's why obesity is so rampant all over the world.
So I wonder if I can ask this question, if this kind of can come right after what you've just described. Mm-hmm. You've been doing some incredible work around nutrition, obesity, and metabolic disease. So I wonder if you can just explain very briefly what metabolic disease is, because many of our viewers might not know, and then some of the findings that you've been having in your research.
Okay. So we lump everything under this big umbrella called chronic metabolic disease or metabolic syndrome. Now, it depends on who you talk to as how that's defined. Most doctors, not me, but most doctors define metabolic syndrome based on the phenomenology. That is, what diseases you see. So, diabetes, heart disease, lipid problems, high blood pressure. And most doctors will tell you, oh, those diseases, yeah, they travel together, and it's because of obesity, that the obesity drives those diseases. Well, guess what? Normal weight people get type 2 diabetes. Normal weight people get hypertension. Normal weight people get lipid problems. Normal weight people get heart disease too. Now, yes, not at the same rate as obese people, but they get it too. And they get it for the same reasons. It's not like it's a different phenomenon. It's the same phenomenon, and they get it at normal weight. And it's because obesity is not the cause of those diseases. Obesity is just another one of those diseases. And it's not necessarily associated. It's a marker for the metabolic problem, not the cause. And that's what the data show. And we now actually have proof of that in children, because we've taken children and we've been able to alter their metabolic profiles on the same number of calories by getting rid of one item from their diet. What do you think that item might be?
Is it a sugar?
Yeah, it would be. It would be. No, it's actually not processed. It's sugar, just sugar. So we're giving these kids, shall we say, kid food? Okay. I mean, bad food.
Sweet stuff.
No, not sweet stuff.
Oh,
That's
okay.
the point. Is we're taking the sweet stuff away.
And you're giving them other things like.
Right. We're taking the pastries away and putting the bagels in. How's that? Okay. So it's not like we're giving them good food. I mean, I wouldn't call bagels good food,
nope.
But it's no sugar added food.
Uh-huh.
And we are seeing complete reversal of metabolic syndrome at the same weight. Wow. So that's pretty hard and fast that it's not about the obesity. It's not about the weight. It's about how your body metabolizes the nutrients that come into it. And it turns out that different nutrients are metabolized differently because a calorie is not a calorie.
I'm glad you said that, because I'd love for you to explain your phrasing, calorie is not a calorie, because of course everyone's heard it.
Well, and no one understands it.
Right.
Right, because after all, how could a calorie not be a calorie? I mean, isn't that, sort of a tautology that doesn't make any sense? Well, the reason is because calories are measured here at your mouth. But ultimately, what calories do to you is measured at the gut as to how many of those calories are actually absorbed. And there are things you can do to limit absorption. It also has to do with how fast those calories are absorbed, because if you absorb them too fast, then your liver gets overwhelmed and that makes your liver sick. Whereas if they got absorbed slower, then your liver wouldn't get sick. And it also has to do with what those calories were as to which pathways in the cells they go down and what they might cause. So different calories are metabolized differently. Different calories are absorbed differently depending on what else is in your diet. So therefore, a calorie is not a calorie because the calories are dependent on context. So that's why a calorie is not a calorie. If you do it purely on quantitation, if you do it purely on absolute numbers, which is what everybody else does, you're going to get it wrong.
So can you give an example of when a calorie isn't a calorie?
Well, the one I use in the book and sort of the obvious and the famous one is almonds. Okay? Love almonds. Almonds are great. Okay? Everybody, almonds. You eat 160 calories in almonds. How many of those 160 calories do you absorb? Turns out only 130. Where'd the other 30 go? Turned out the other 30 didn't get absorbed early on in the intestine because the fiber in the almonds, soluble and in the insoluble fiber, you need both, and almonds have both, forms a gel on the inside of the intestine, a whitish gel, which coats the inside of the lumen of the intestine, providing a secondary barrier. So your intestine is a barrier, but now you've got a second barrier inside it, like a tube inside a tube. And what that means is that those calories from the almonds are going to slide further down the intestine and not get absorbed early on where it could potentially overwhelm the liver. More of those calories are going to make it down to the middle of the intestine, and that's where the bacteria live. The bacteria do not live up high because the acid in your stomach is just coming into the intestine, and the pH is way too low for any bacteria to live except for like Helicobacter pylori, which causes ulcers. Okay? But the rest of the bacteria are all further down the intestine, and they're going to chew up some of the calories because, you got 10 trillion cells in your body, but you got 100 trillion bacteria in your intestine. You got 10 times more bacteria than you have cells. They got to eat something. The question is, what do they eat? Well, they eat what you eat. The question is, how much did you get versus how much did they get? And what you want them to get more. Because when they get more, then the bacterial diversity improves. You get more different kinds of bacteria. And we now know from people who study the intestinal microbiome, and I just went to 2 talks on this just last week, the more different kinds of bacteria you have in your intestine, the healthier you are, and the less chance you will have of gaining weight. So feeding your bacteria is super important. And there's an easy way to feed your bacteria. It's called fiber.
Uh-huh.
But fiber is what's not in our diet.
Uh-huh.
Fiber's been taken out of our diet for shelf life, for convenience, for depreciation. So we are eating a low fiber diet, and that is causing our bacterial diversity to be down, and that means that we're absorbing those calories early rather than not absorbing them late, and so the bacteria are the wrong bacteria, and our livers are getting overwhelmed, and now we have disease. So almonds are good.
Fiber, it's not just the almonds, but almost anything with a lot of fiber would be one of those foods that are considered, their calories are not necessarily all that you think they are.
That's exactly right. But then of course the food industry says, well, okay, we'll give you fiber 1 bars, or with lots of sugar, or let's give you Metamucil, and that doesn't work. The fiber actually has to be inherent in the food, and it has to be both soluble and insoluble. And Metamucil is only soluble fiber. You can't put insoluble fiber into food. We haven't figured out how to do that. It has to be part of the inherent food itself. And so that means real food, because processed food is fiberless food. So the problem is, that's what, what do we eat? We eat what the food industry makes, and the food industry is making fiberless food because it lasts longer, it goes bad, and they can sell it for more. So that's the problem.
So back to working with the children, and when you took away the sugar, left everything else in, are you saying that sugar overall, no matter what kind of sugar it is what people should be avoiding?
Added sugar.
Added sugar.
Added sugar. So there's a big difference between endogenous sugar, like strawberries and blueberries, and those are great and those are fine, and I'm not against, fruit. Okay, then there's added sugar, and they're not the same. So the molecule is the same. I mean, sucrose is sucrose, whether it comes from a strawberry or whether it comes from Coca-Cola. But whether you absorb it or not is very much dependent on the context. And if you don't absorb it because the fiber is there, then it's not going to hurt you. But if it was put there and there's no fiber offsetting it, then it is going to hurt you. And so added sugar is what we're talking about here. We're not talking about fruit. The problem, of course, is the thing in the middle. Okay, the bugaboo, the big nemesis, the thing that makes everything a problem, fruit juice. Because everybody thinks fruit juice is healthy because it comes from fruit. So what's the difference between fruit and fruit juice? The answer is the fiber. And the fiber is the good part of the fruit. The fiber is what makes the rest of it okay. But when you turn it into juice, now you don't have any fiber. The fiber went in the garbage. That's not where it belongs. It belongs in your intestine.
So it slows down the absorption of the sugar.
And so now your sugar is really, absorption is really fast. Your liver gets overwhelmed by fruit juice also. And so basically you're in the same boat as you were in with the soda. So fruit juice is not the answer. And I know there are a lot of people out there who drink in smoothies. And if you want to drink green smoothies, with kale and then cucumber, fine. And that's okay. I mean, you're destroying the fiber when you put it in the Vitamix, but you don't have anything to inhibit the absorption of because there's no sugar. Now, if you do it with a fruit smoothie and you put the bananas and the strawberries and then you put it in the Vitamix, then you got a problem because basically you've destroyed the insoluble fiber. The blades of the Vitamix have sheared that insoluble fiber to smithereens. You can't make that gel. It's like a lattice work on the inside that the soluble fiber then plugs the holes of. And so you can't create the architecture of that gel in order to use it as that secondary barrier. So juicing the fruit is the wrong answer. That's not the way to do it. Eat the fruit. Don't drink the juice.
So right, so people should eat their fruit whole. And probably not worry about eating too much fruit. It's probably pretty hard to eat too much fruit.
Yeah, it's really hard to eat too much fruit. Our colleague Cindy Gershon, who's a nutrition educator like you and founder of the Wellness City Challenge, one of our partners, and also the chef who contributed to all the recipes for the Fat Chance Cookbook, she does a class. She teaches nutrition in the Contra Costa County. And the first class every year, the same first lesson, she takes 2 kids and she hands the 2 kids from the class 6 oranges each. And she says to the first kid, "Here, kid, here's 6 oranges, make juice." So the kid takes the 6 oranges, squeezes them all, gets about 12.5 ounces of juice, downs it, says, "Okay, what's for breakfast?" Second kid, she says, "Here, kid, eat the 6 oranges." Kid eats orange number 1, orange number 2, orange number 3, gets to orange number 4. Every kid, same answer, throws up.
Oh my gosh.
Vomit basin in the classroom, ready to go, because nobody can eat 4 oranges. Kid says, "I'm gonna die."
Too much.
And not only that, but then the kid doesn't eat lunch or dinner either. Why? Because the fiber.
So
the fiber happens. It's so filling, and it transports the intestinal contents further down the intestine quicker, so you get the satiety signal sooner. So it's really hard to overeat fruit. I mean, you really have to work at it. Now, does that mean that nobody can do that? I suppose some people can do that, but in general, I think fruit is self-limiting, and I don't think we have to give a prescription on fruit.
That sounds great. And so, if that's okay, what would you say is actually something that, or some things that people should be avoiding? I know there's there's a long list, but can we give some general categories maybe?
Well, look, if it's got a label, it's a warning label. I mean, it's that simple. Real food doesn't need a label, okay, because it's real food. Okay? They only need to put a label on it if they did something to it. They don't have to put a label on something if they didn't do something to it. Okay? So like, for instance, broccoli doesn't have a label. Fish doesn't have a label. Meat doesn't have a label. Okay? But things where something was done to it, then they have a label. So, you know, the more labels you're reading, the more crap you're buying. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Any refined carbohydrate, so virtually, you know, rolls, breads, pastries, etc., you know, that's refined carbohydrate. Now, that doesn't mean it's sugar. I mean, it could be no sugar bread, for instance, the kind you buy at the bakery. And if that's the case, sugarless because it's flour, likely, or you can buy whole grain bread, and then you've got fiber with it, and then you're only going to eat probably one slice, and you're going to be pretty full, as opposed to, say, you know, bakery bread, where, you know, you can probably eat the whole loaf, you know, especially here in San Francisco, where the sourdough bread is really good, but you tend to overeat. But it's glucose, it's not fructose, fructose being the sweet molecule of sugar. So it will drive insulin up. It will drive weight gain. But what it won't do is it won't overwhelm your liver, because 80% of the glucose load from glucose goes to the rest of the body, not to the liver. Whereas fructose, 100% of the fructose load goes to the liver. And so the liver gets overwhelmed. And that's why liver fat is the sign of sugar consumption. Liver fat is the driver of all of these chronic metabolic diseases. And so sugar is the bad, really bad guy. Yeah, glucose, it drives weight gain. But sugar, that is fructose, that drives chronic metabolic disease. So we have dissociated those two apart. And that's what the research shows. That's what the data show. That's what the epidemiology actually shows. Now, there are plenty of doctors who still think, well, if you've got obesity and you've got diabetes, they are clearly related, but that's not necessarily so. In fact, there's a paper that came out in Science, Global Health, where they look at the ratio of obesity to diabetes in many populations around the world. And there are plenty of populations where they're diabetic without being obese, like India, Pakistan, and China. 11% diabetes in India, Pakistan, and China, and they're not fat. If it's obesity causing the diabetes, how do you explain that? Well, you can't, because it is so.
So that was a good general gist of what people should be avoiding. Now let's kind of get into the nitty gritty of, you said glucose versus fructose, right?
Right.
And we do have a lot of questions. Agave, honey.
All the same. All the same. Caloric sweetener.
Added sugar.
It's added sugar. It's all the same. Actually, agave, people say, oh, agave, that's really good because it has a low glycemic index.
Right, that's what they say.
That's what they say. Garbage. Complete and utter trash. It does have a low glycemic index. That's not trash. That's true. But the fact that somehow that makes it good for you or better than the others is absolute trash. Why? So what is glycemic index? What does that mean? Because a lot of people think glycemic index is like the whole, enchilada, the whole, key to the kingdom, as it were. And there are a lot of dietitians making a lot of hay out of glycemic index. Okay, garbage. It's garbage. Okay, here's why. What is glycemic index? Glycemic index is how high does your blood sugar go after 50 grams of carbohydrate in any given food. That's glycemic index. So white bread is the gold standard, and then everything's compared to white bread. So carrots are the perfect way to explain this issue of glycemic index. I love carrots.
Mhm.
Carrots are good.
Great
Okay, carrots
for
are great. High, okay, high glycemic index. High glycemic index in carrots. If you eat 50 grams of carbohydrate in carrots, your blood sugar is going to go pretty high. So some dietitians will tell you, don't eat carrots.
Say that
Garbage.
a little louder.
Garbage. Why? Because it's not about glycemic index. It's about glycemic load. Glycemic load is a different phenomenon than glycemic index. So what's glycemic load? Glycemic load is how many carrots do you have to eat to get the 50 grams of carbohydrate in carrots? What's the volume of food that you have to consume to get the 50 grams for any given food? So the answer for carrots, you have to eat 1.4 pounds of carrots to get 50 grams of carbohydrate.
I think that's worse than 4 oranges.
Yeah, wait. Okay? You have to eat the whole friggin' Grimway truck. I mean, you know, you can't do it. Nobody would do it. So who cares if carrots have a high glycemic index? Because they have a low glycemic load. They're not going to raise your insulin very high. Glycemic index is just a proxy for how high is your insulin going to go, because how high is your blood sugar going to go. Okay? So it's about glycemic load. And any food can be a low glycemic load food if it's consumed with its inherent, its endogenous fiber, the fiber nature packaged it with. So who cares about glycemic index? If you ate it as real food in the first place, glycemic index would go out the window and wouldn't be an issue at all. Now, the other reason that glycemic index is a canard and junk is what is the thing in our diet that has the lowest glycemic index? Fructose. Fructose has a glycemic index of 19. That's the lowest thing on the entire food roster. So you'd say, fructose, low glycemic index, must be good. Yeah, it doesn't raise your serum glucose. It's fructose, for Christ's sake. It raises your serum fructose instead. And it turns out that when you raise your serum fructose, it binds inside your artery walls to something called the advanced glycosylation receptor. It's called fructose RAGE, a receptor for advanced glycosylation end products, it's called. And that is one of the things that causes the stiffening of your arteries and causes thrombosis and causes more chance for heart attack than anything else. So they say fructose, wait, fructose doesn't raise your hemoglobin A1C, which is the thing that we look at in diabetics. No, it doesn't raise your hemoglobin A1C because hemoglobin A1C is glucose bound to hemoglobin. It raises your fructose bound to hemoglobin. You don't measure the hemoglobin A1C. In research studies, you can actually see the fructose bound to hemoglobin, but it's not hemoglobin A1C, it's hemoglobin fructose instead. So it's actually way worse. So this whole concept of glycemic index is just complete and utter trash. And people out there need to understand that the science shows what the story is. Do not let, shall we say, nutritional zealots, pander to you. Okay, this is just junk science. Let's talk about real science.
Thank you, that's great. I'm going to take a second and just see if we have any questions from the audience. Anything that we should look at? Thank you. All right.
That's a lot of questions.
That's a few questions here.
Okay.
You want to take a look too?
Sure. Let's see. Oh boy. Casey says, please address what we can do to stop. Wow. I wish I knew the answer to that. I know what we're doing. I will tell you that, this is unfortunately a congressional issue. That the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, tried to do this back in 1981. It was known as the Kidvid scandal. And what happened was that the food industry lobbied Congress, and Congress declawed the FTC and passed the Federal Trade Commission Modernization Act of 1984, and basically took away the entire all the FTC's power. So the ability to market to children is actually in the hands of Congress. And so it is very hard to fix that at our level, at a sort of baseline level. So the best thing we can do is ultimately put pressure on Congress. Now, how do you put pressure on Congress? Because Congress seems pretty insular, doesn't it? So, number one, NGOs like IRN and other organizations that we partner with, like Union of Concerned Scientists, Environmental Working Group, et cetera, and we partner with several organizations, are doing our best to try to make headway on this issue. People like Mark Bittman and Michael Pollan, Ricardo Salvador are doing their best as well, and we are in complete and utter lockstep in support of their efforts as well. But again, we are private citizens. The question is, who does Congress listen to? That's the question. And I will tell you right now, it ain't you and me. Okay, so who do they listen to? Well, they listen. So who stands to lose from this? Not the food industry. Food industry is making money. Mm-hmm. Well, individuals, but so who stands to lose? Well, big business stands to lose because of economic productivity and insurance. They stand to lose now with Obamacare.
I thought you meant if we don't get this change, who stands to lose?
Well, oh no, well, we all stand to lose. Well, we all stand to lose if we don't change. Yeah. So our job is to basically lobby big business and insurance, and we do that consistently. We have been doing that. And I've met with people from Cigna and Aetna and United, and also people within big business, banks, particularly in Europe, but here in the United States as well, in order to make the argument that they need to partner with us on the science to get Congress to do the right thing. So junk food marketing to children is sort of the linchpin issue that basically says where the power is. And yes, we do have to fix it. Yes, it is a disaster. And you cannot expect the food industry themselves to regulate themselves. That's what they've done to deflect these issues for the last 4 decades. But we need much better arguments in order to make that happen. And business and insurance, they're the ones with the purse strings. They're the ones who have to help us get there. So let's see.
I know.
Oh yes, Marcos asked the $64 zillion question. Diet sweeteners. Well, if you can't eat sugar, or you should lower your sugar consumption. By the way, sugar is celebratory. Sugar is fun. Sugar is apple pie, 4th of July, birthday parties. The problem is there's a birthday party every day. That's the problem. Okay? Sugar is supposed to be special. Sugar is supposed to be once a week, maybe. Okay? The problem is sugar's with every meal now. It used to be once a week, now it's once a meal. And you know what? Sugar's supposed to be special. But if it's with every meal, it ain't special, is it? And this is the problem. So people say, well, gee, if you're going to take all that sugar out of all my food, what are you going to do? You replace it with, put diet sweeteners in instead, right? So are diet sweeteners good? They're 0 calorie, right? That should be good if calories were the problem. Calories are not the problem. So what do we know? Here's what we know. We know that if you take people on their regular diet and you give them a liter of sugared soda a day for 6 months, or a liter of diet soda a day for 6 months, or a liter of milk per day for 6 months, or a liter of water per day for 6 months, here's what happens. The people who drank the sugared soda, 8.5 kilo weight gain, okay? 18-pound weight gain. The people who drank the diet soda, 1.5 kilo weight gain. But why did they gain weight at all if it was a diet soda? Now, they didn't gain as much as the sugar soda, that's true. But why did they gain any? See, problem there. People who drank the milk, no weight gain. People who drank the water, weight loss. Duh. So then you look at the studies where they take people who are drinking sugared soda and they substitute diet soda, right? Turns out those people don't gain weight. but they don't lose weight either. So if you're taking like 400 calories a day out of their diet by getting rid of the sugared soda and substituting diet soda, would you expect weight loss? But there is none. So how do you explain that? And the answer is because it's not about the calories. It never was. They make it about the calories, but it's wrong. That's what we're trying to fix. That's why IRN exists, is to undo this junk science. So are diet sweeteners good? The answer is we don't know. We don't know if they're good. Why don't we know if they're good? So two reasons. First, actually three reasons. First reason, there's something called pharmacokinetics and there's something called pharmacodynamics. They're not the same. Pharmacokinetics is what your body does to a drug. Pharmacodynamics is what a drug does to your body. They're not the same. So we have all the pharmacokinetics for all the diet sweeteners because the FDA says you have to. They won't approve a diet sweetener unless you demonstrate the pharmacokinetics, because the pharmacokinetics tells you about acute toxicity, whether you're going to keel over and die. But pharmacodynamics, that's chronic toxicity. That's whether it's going to kill you in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. And the FDA does not demand that. In fact, it's not in their charter. So the food industry says, wait, these are expensive studies. They take a long time. FDA is not asking for it. We're not going to do it. Can't help our sales. We're not going to do it. And then the NIH says, food industry's compound, food industry's profit. We're not going to pay for it. So we got an FDA doesn't ask for it. We got a food industry who won't do it. We got an NIH who won't pay for it. No data. That's problem number one. Problem number two. You put something sweet on the tongue. What happens? Message goes from the tongue to the brain, says, sugar bolus is coming. Get ready to release the insulin. Corticotropic nerve. Brain tells the pancreas via the dorsal mononucleus of the vagus, sugar bolus is coming. Get ready to release the insulin on my command. But then it was diet sweetener. What does the pancreas do? Does it go, man, I got all these insulin vesicles ready, stored up, ready to roll. Oh, wait till tomorrow. Or does it go, you know, I got all these insulin vesicles, I'm going to go find some calories to work on. And you end up overeating because the insulin made you. And it drives weight gain. So which is it? We don't even know that. There's some data, indirect data, that suggests it's the latter, not the former. But it's early. And then finally, the third possible problem. Turns out, in studies done mostly in animals, but a couple in humans now, diet sweeteners change the intestinal microbiome and cause glucose intolerance, possibly through leaky gut. And by changing the apposition of the epithelial cells in the intestine through mechanisms we don't quite understand yet, but you can actually measure the change in glucose tolerance from a diet sweetener alone. And if that's the case, then that would cause inflammation, that would lead to inflammation, problems with visceral fat, et cetera, all by itself having nothing to do with calories, just because of the chemical itself. So 3 reasons to be concerned. But do we have the data today, 2015, to say diet sweeteners are good or bad? The answer is no.
Not yet.
Not yet. What I like to say, is that diet sweeteners should be treated like methadone.
Oh.
So we got a lot of drug addicts out there. We got a lot of heroin addicts out there. What do? They put them on methadone, right? Because heroin is quick on, quick off, and so you get the big, valley, which then causes you to go breaking and entering, and robbing and murdering people, and and then you need your next fix, right? Methadone has a long half-life, so people who don't break and enter, and the goal is of addiction treatment programs is to wean the methadone slowly off until finally you're off everything, right? That's the goal. But of course, that doesn't happen. They just stay on it. So if diet sweeteners were like methadone, that is, you used it as a method for weaning people off sugar, then I could see the use for them. So people who do that, I would say that was probably a good thing to do rather than staying on sugar. But the goal is to get it down and off, not just substitution.
So I love that you brought up the addiction. We know that sugar is addictive as well.
It drives all of the phenomena that go along with addiction. That is reward intolerance. Now, the one thing that has not been shown with sugar yet is withdrawal. Okay, it's like caffeine. We have tolerance and withdrawal. Okay, heroin, we have tolerance and withdrawal. Alcohol, we have tolerance and withdrawal. So for sugar, we have tolerance for sure, but we don't have hard and fast evidence of withdrawal. Now, just so happens, where is sugar usually teamed up with? Teamed up with caffeine. Right? It's called soda.
I see.
So, and that's on purpose because that's two addictive substances together. That's on purpose. That's not a mistake.
Coffee and coffee cake cup. That's where I was going.
That too. But so we don't know if when people come off soda and they have symptoms, whether that's the sugar withdrawal or the caffeine withdrawal or both. That hasn't yet been determined. But we don't care. We don't care because it turns out now the new definition of addiction is tolerance and dependence, not tolerance and withdrawal. And that's how you can get shopping addiction, internet addiction, porn addiction, gambling addiction. Those don't have withdrawal because those are not substances, but they're behaviors, but they have tolerance and dependence. And so they've changed the definition. The DSM-5 has changed the definition in sugar dependence.
So if someone ate a lot of sugar every day, do you think they'd have a hard time weaning themselves off?
Absolutely. That's the big problem. And the problem is that a lot of the sugar is in foods you didn't know had it. So how do you wean yourself off sugar when you don't know where it is? So you know where it is in the soft drinks. That's easy. But what about the rest of the food?
Can they read the label?
Well, they can, but it's hidden. It's hidden in plain sight because there are 56 different names for sugar.
Uh-huh.
And you don't know them. And they don't want you to know them. Okay?
How could one find out?
Well, I think it's table 17.2. It's online. There are many places. There are lots of resources to find that out. It's in the movie Fed Up. It's in Sugar Coated, which is a new documentary that's coming out. It's in various places. At some point we can actually, and it's on our website, right? Thank you, Wolfram. It's on our website. So please go look for the 56 names so that you don't have to be hoodwinked. You won't be bamboozled. You can actually figure out how to limit your sugar consumption. In addition, we published an ebook 2 years ago. My wife did this with me, called Sugar Has 56 Names, a Shopper's Guide, which has some text that explains all of this, but also has tables. So you can take your iPad into the store and look up what it is, and it will tell you how much added sugar is in that food in order so that you can figure out what the best option is.
Well, that's great.
So there are ways to do it. But the problem is the food industry doesn't want you to know. That's why they're fighting the added sugar designation on the in the FDA proposal. They're fighting it tooth and nail. That's exactly why, because they don't want you to know, because this is their juggernaut. This is how they made so much money, and they do not want to give it up. And we're going to make them give it up. And we need your help.
Yes, and so actually I'll put that in right now. If you're interested in donating, you can actually go to the website, which is responsiblefoods.org. And there are science-based articles, extensive resources, news. And I did see the list. If you follow the IRN on any one of their social media sites, they often put up the list of the 56
names?
56 different names for sugar. That's a lot. So we have just a couple more minutes, so I'm going to squeeze in 2 more questions. Let's see if we can do that. So if someone has memory loss or minor dementia, would cutting out sweets have any short-term positive results?
Oh boy.
Is that a long question?
It's a really long question. We have no data, but oh boy, are we interested in it. In fact, we're planning a study to address that question very shortly. We are very interested, but today I cannot give you an answer to that question. Okay.
And another really important burning question here is that since we're saying that sugar is basically the culprit for the metabolic disease that we're seeing.
Well, it's not the only culprit, it's just the biggest culprit.
The biggest culprit.
The biggest culprit actually was trans fats. Trans fats were the single worst thing you could put in your body. No, trans fats were the devil incarnate. Okay, what are trans fats? You know, it's the trans double bond can't be broken. That's why bacteria can't chew them up. That's why food with trans fats don't go rancid. That's why you got the 10-year-old Twinkie.
We're supposed to not have that much of that anymore.
Well, now they're banned.
Offerings.
Well, now they're banned.
Yes,
okay? But it took
good.
26 years to ban it. Okay, so trans fats actually cause chronic metabolic disease worse than anything. But we know that, and they've been coming down. So after that, sugar's next. Okay, and sugar, because of its unique metabolism, because of fructose's unique metabolism in the liver and how it is handled, it's basically handled the same as alcohol. Fructose and alcohol are handled virtually identically by the liver, and that's why children are getting the diseases of alcohol, type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease, without drinking alcohol. So these are chronic metabolic disease used to only be seen in alcoholics. Now it's seen in everybody,
And that's
including children.
fatty liver disease.
Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Right. So
Okay.
that's the thing.
So sugar is the biggest deal now.
Now,
Are you indirectly saying, I think this is a really important question, are you indirectly saying that people can just go hog wild on eating fat and not worry about it?
No. Look, there's just today, there was an opinion piece in the New York Times from my colleagues and good friends, Dariush Mozaffarian and David Ludwig, whom I support wholeheartedly. Why is what's the government afraid about fat? Is basically what it was called. And the fact of the matter is, we have really good data now that a fat is not a fat either. Now, when we went low fat, we went low all fats. And it turns out there are lots of good fats, like omega-3s, which are heart healthy, anti-inflammatory, anti-Alzheimer's, save your life. We also have trans fats, okay? They all got pooled together under fat. So it turns out that there are fats that are better for you, like, for instance, monounsaturates like olive oil, which is liver healthy. And there are omega-6s, which can be potentially pro-inflammatory, at least in very high dose. There are medium-chain triglycerides, which you find in things like palm oil, which unfortunately is really a big deal because it's so cheap, but is handled in a different way than standard fats. It's not incorporated into what we call microns, so it sort of overwhelms the liver, so it can cause chronic metabolic disease too. We have polyunsaturates. Everybody says polyunsaturates are great, and they're pretty good. They're certainly better than other things until you heat them. And when you heat polyunsaturates, you know what you get?
What do you get?
Trans fats.
Wow.
So you have to be really careful about it, and people tend to burn their polyunsaturated
yes,
oils
can.
when they're frying stuff.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that may not be such a good idea either. So the whole fat story is so complicated, and it's not like, oh, you can eat your fats, not eat your fats. I mean, avocado is saturated fat, and avocado is great. Dairy, it turns out, is different from red meat. They're both saturated fats, but dairy is odd chain fatty acids with a different phospholipid signature than, say, red meat fatty acids, which are even chain without that phospholipid signature actually protects against diabetes. So no, I'm not saying that you can go hog wild eating fats. What I'm saying is that the whole fat story, the whole fat hypothesis was based on the idea that a fat was a fat. And that was wrong too.
Got it.
A lot of junk science, Lucy. Time to debunk it.
Well, I think you're doing a good start.
No, we're doing it. We're all doing it together, okay? I'm just one cog in this wheel. The point is, it's a very slow moving wheel. It's like, turning the aircraft carrier. We've been doing the same thing for 40 years. Everybody is vested in the old nutrition, if you will, thinking, oh yeah, saturated fat, that's bad. Calories, that's bad. Sugar, well, no problem. We have to debunk all of this. We now have the data. It's there. That's what the science is about. That's what's on the IRN website. That's what I contribute to. That's what what you should know. That's why you're watching this webinar, is to get that information. And I'm happy for you to get it. And I want you to get it.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to close. That hopefully you've gotten something from our webinar. And we would also love to thank Morrison Foerster for providing this great venue. Thank you. This is a lovely place we have.
Morrison Foerster is a law firm that does a lot of pro bono work. They are our lawyer. Okay, so if you have anything you want to say to us, say it to us. And if you want to sue us, take it up with them.
And if you want more information, please go to responsiblefoods.org. They have a lot of information on their sites. And also get involved if you can, either through donations or just get active and become more educated about yourself and your nutrition. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stop right there.